Good evening. Well, we'll start with these questions. You mentioned that the first chapter of Genesis gave the secret of pre-existence and after-existence. Would you enlarge on that and do the theories of pre- and after-existence, such as reincarnation and karma, have any basis, or are they figments of human imagination? Or indeed they have significance. This subject of karma, reincarnation, these are all parts of the teaching of truth, absolute truth. And they are translated as on the physical plane, the mental or the spiritual, just as every other phase of life may be. Now, you will remember that the Master, Christ Jesus, said that he came to do the will of the Father. My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. Of myself I do nothing. And then, when he was asked, art thou he that should come? He said, go show John. The sick are healed, the dead are raised, and so forth. In other words, he acknowledged that his mission was to the human race, and it was a mission of salvation, a mission of revealing to humanhood the divine laws and the divine life. He didn't start with the absolute statement that we are children of God. He started out with, you are children of your father the devil. He ended up with reminding us that now are we the sons of God. And he took, if you follow the ministry of the Gospels, you will see that he took humanity right where he found it. At the wedding, he turned the water into wine. He met their particular need as humans. He didn't tell them that as spiritual beings they should have no wine. And he did not say to the people, to his people, that they were pure spiritual being without error, regardless of what he may have known in consciousness, but rather he brought out that you must do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's purely on the human level. And cautioned us, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. Now there it is very clear that he's talking to us just as if he were in this room, talking to each one of us and reminding us that at this stage of our development we are going to sow as we reap. Therefore, reap as we sow, reap as we sow. And Paul warns us that we must not sow to the flesh, or we will reap corruption. You see, none of this is talking to us from the standpoint of our spiritual identity. It is all talking to us from the standpoint of our humanhood, which evidently is in preparation for the message of our true identity. Therefore, karma is the law given unto us as human beings. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Now then, there is no karma once you have realized your spiritual identity. There is no karma once you have opened your consciousness so that you become one with the vine. Abide in the Word and let the Word abide in you. There's no karma because there's no effect from any cause. You're not putting any mortal or material or mental cause in operation, therefore there's no effect. Once you have made your attunement with the Spirit, you're not under the law because you're no longer the man of flesh that cannot please God. While you're the man of flesh that cannot please God, you may be doing some very good things today and reap good karma. But you may be doing some bad things tomorrow and reap some bad karma. But once you have made the transition from man whose breath is in his nostril to Christhood, there's no more karma. There's no more rebirth. That's the Oriental meaning of the fact that at a certain stage of development, the master knows no rebirth. Of course he can't have a rebirth, he can't even have a first birth if he has attained the fullness of a spiritual identity, and until he does, there must be births and rebirths, just as the same as our old friend W.C. Fields on a radio program in which he is answering questions. And a lady phones in and says, can my husband leave drink alone? He says he can't. And Fields says, of course he can. I've done it 1,000 times. And so it is with us that we are born and reborn 1,000 times. We may not die what they call the physical death 1,000 times, that is, pass through the transition and rebirth, but certainly there isn't anyone in this room, I'm sure, that hasn't died a few times and been reborn and still are not convinced that you've attained your full purity. So there's going to be some more deaths in this room, some more surrender, some more yielding of the self, and there will be some rebirths. That must inevitably follow. But I'm supposing that we do pass on out of this plane of existence before we have attained that full measure of manhood in Christ Jesus. You know, as you know the nature of God, you surely know that that doesn't mean the end of your opportunity to find your spiritual perfection. Certainly not. You will have to be born again and you will have to die again. That must inevitably follow. Whether you do it by dying out of the flesh or whether you do it through going through repeated deaths and births in this world, ultimately everyone must die sufficiently until they are reborn of the Spirit and then do not have to go through this experience of the world of good and evil. You can know how close you are getting to the divine consciousness by watching what degrees of good and evil you still react to. In other words, how much do you react joyously to the good things and how much do you react badly to the bad things, or in what measure are you becoming indifferent to either the human good or the human evil, since something else has taken its place, and eventually something else must take its place. There is a spiritual kingdom. There is a spiritual consciousness, and in it, even the good things of life would be bad. Even the good things of life would not be enjoyable. So you see, it is only at the beginning of our metaphysical careers that we think that demonstration should be an improvement in our human experience, that we think that double the income is a good demonstration, or that the heart, liver, or lungs operating a little better, or even perfectly according to human standards, represents demonstration. It doesn't at all. It really represents a degree of improved humanhood which in the last analysis will come to an end in one way or another. The true demonstration, that which at this point of our career we should be seeking, is not merely the increase of dollars in our experience or the increase of health, as desirable as they are on this road, but rather that rebirth, that entrance into a state of consciousness which begins to question the master when he is at the end of his road, and begins to say, my kingdom is not of this world. Aha, now we're really getting into a spiritual kingdom. You see, we're told that he was crucified because it was reported to the Roman authorities that he was disobedient to their laws and talked continuously of setting up another kingdom. And he did. He was guilty. But not in the way that they reported, because he never did plan to tear down the Roman kingdom. He never did set out to set the Hebrews free politically or economically. He never interfered, and he never preached against the Roman government or even against their slavery. He preached another kingdom. And he said definitely, my kingdom is not of this world. And in trouble, he did not use the weapons of this world. Never, never did he call on armies to defend him. Never did he call on his followers to protect him. Never once is there a record in Scripture of his resorting to any human mode or means for his supply, for his safety, for his security, for his continuity of human existence. Never once. My kingdom is not of this world. If I needed it, I could summon angels, legions of angels. Of course, he could have summoned all his followers. They probably have been glad of a little battle. But that wasn't the way. Nor did he protect himself with legal counsel. Oh, no. He was depending entirely on a spiritual presence, a spiritual power, and a spiritual demonstration which did not include longevity. He was not interested in preserving the physical sense of life, since he felt enabled to show forth that in his consciousness, or in his demonstration, or in his kingdom, life was eternal, and not all the crucifixes in the world could destroy it. And so you see, he had a different mode of demonstration, not the demonstration of things. Actually, that is part of his secret, in the three temptations. He was an hungered, and we are led to believe that he had powers of magic, occult powers, which would enable him to turn stones into bread. But would he do it? No. No man shall not live by bread alone. Therefore, he would make no effort to demonstrate the physical good. And then what happens? Well, the very moment he releases his desire for physical good, his spiritual good appears. And we can assume that in one way or another he was fed, more than likely by just having his sense of hunger disappear from him, until such time as the next thing would come along. So you see then that to talk of crucifixion, of resurrection, of reincarnation, of rebirth, these are all true. And they're true at different levels. They're true at the level of going through a dying process in our personal lives until we're entirely purified of our physical, mental, financial desires and awaken only in the realization of spiritual fulfillment. On the other hand, it may appear to us in physical form as an actual experience of death, which of course could never be permanent, because there isn't a single soul anywhere on the face of the globe whose ultimate destiny isn't full and complete spiritual realization. Now, it makes no difference whether you have lived 1,000 lives on earth before. One thing is certain: you are as old as God. Your life began the moment God's life began, because there never were two lives, there was only one. And that one has been an expression from its very beginning. And therefore we have lived. Now, whether or not there are some who have never found form on earth, or whether we never found form on earth until this particular incarnation, that's something for each individual to learn as they spiritually unfold. But actually it would appear that most people have lived many, many times and died and been given further opportunity to expand, and some have taken advantage of it and some haven't. Some have gone up spiritually and some have gone down. And as we are here today taking advantage of the opportunities given us for spiritual unfoldment, it is a natural thing to assume that were we to pass from sight this day, this night, tomorrow, that our spiritual expansion and development would be continuous. We would go right on from where we are at this moment and continue to expand spiritually. Whether or not that would involve returning to earth consciousness again is something that has to be worked out within the consciousness of every individual. Certain it is that there are those who, when they have completed their lifespan, this particular span, will not return to the mortal sense of body. Would you please delve more deeply into the ways that we, who are not practitioners, artists, or writers, can apply the principles of the infinite way in our daily lives at our offices? Indeed, I'll be glad to. Regardless of what you may be doing, housework, stenography, machinist, printer, regardless of what you may be doing, physical work or mental, bookkeeping, auditing, if you are doing it with your educated knowledge, that is, with your education, with your mind that has studied, you are far from expressing all of your capacities. You are only doing whatever you're doing in a very limited way. Now, once you have learned through meditation to open yourself to an inner inspiration, you bring to the same work that you did before an entirely different capacity. And you will find that whatever you have done before, you now not only do better, more quickly, more efficiently, but eventually you are led to where you don't do it at all because something higher has revealed itself for you. In other words, it makes no difference what we're doing. We are not yet fulfilling the fullness of the Christ. Even a practitioner is only a part way on their journey. A practitioner has not reached the end of the road. A practitioner must later become a teacher, but a teacher must later outgrow that to be a revelator in one way or another, whether it's through writing or recording, radio, television. And then eventually they must rise still higher to where, as pure consciousness, they're reaching the consciousness of the world without any physical contact. Now, let's not get too far into that, but remain at this level, that if you are driving an automobile and you're merely doing it by what you know of handling gear shifts and gas pedals, gas throttles, and if you are doing it only by remembering the laws of the road, you are only getting a certain degree of rightness into your driving. Once you are open to the spiritual impulse, you will find that driving an automobile is so automatic that it's almost impossible to make a mistake, even if your attention is taken from the road. You will find that even where there are opportunities for accidents, that this higher awareness, the spiritual consciousness, somehow takes the wheel right out of your hand and guides you away from the accident, or in some way manipulates the car for you and gets you out of trouble. You see, the whole part of that is this. There is a higher faculty than our human intellect. The object of meditation is contact with that higher faculty. It's a faculty of the soul. It's not a reasoning faculty. It operates like the first chapter of Genesis. Let there be light, and there was light, but it doesn't bother to invent a light. It doesn't bother to seek out laws. It just says, let there be light, and there was light. It is a state of consciousness that knows what it's doing without having to sit down to think it out and reason it out and have reasons why. It goes straight to the point and does it. Now, regardless of the nature of our work, there is a way of doing it that transcends the way we have been taught through the mind. And that way is through this other faculty, this higher faculty. Now, the moment you get above purely mechanical work into the mental realms, you will find that this is even more true, because contact with this higher faculty brings to us ideas which the intellect never knew was in existence. For instance, when was it that there was no airplane in existence? Right within our own lifespan, most of us. And yet, with no previous experience, with no knowledge of any laws of flying, somebody, sometime, all of a sudden perceived these laws and began to experiment and hook them up. Now we have modern flying and wonderful flying. In the same way, you remember in The Infinite Way, I told the story of Marconi, who even as a youngster had discovered what none of the college professors had discovered, that there is no resistance in the air to messages that are sent through the air. How did he learn it? Not out of books, because nobody had discovered it. No books to teach it to him, no teachers to teach it to him. Yet out of something, out of somewhere, he had, and he was the only one who had that knowledge. There is no resistance in the air to messages sent through, and so he was able with that to go right on to his other experiments and come forth with the radio. And so it has been. As you watch the ages go by and see how music has changed, how art has changed, painting, sculpture, you wonder how someone came along all of a sudden and changed the entire trend. And everything up to that moment was considered the most modern art. Now, all of a sudden, begins to be passé. And so it is. Those who are attuned to this higher faculty find these ideas flowing in, ideas of new creation and, as I said, greater capacities for doing what we're already doing. I have told classes of the experience of Mr. Landone, who slept only 52 minutes average out of every 24 hours. That's all. By actual timing by his secretary, he averaged 52 minutes. But he didn't take the 52 minutes every day. Oh, no. He didn't bother to go to bed for 3 or 4 days, and then he took 2 or 3 hours and made up for lost time. And he was able to turn out an entire magazine every month and a newspaper article every week, and never less than 20 books in a year. And he carried a metaphysical healing practice always of around 3,000 patients. Now you see, he must have tapped a source far beyond the physical powers of man to endure. Of course, he died a comparatively young man of 97 years and 9 months. And he never stopped, remember, until the moment of his passing. He never stopped even one day before to go to bed to do his dying. No, he did it right while he was at work. So you see, there are capacities that flow to us from an inner source. And as you perceive that, you perceive what the Master meant when he said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And as you are filled with this word, and let this word fill you, you live in it, and let it live in you, you will find these other capacities opening. And then whatever work you're doing will be done better, more quickly, with greater inspiration, and then lead to greater things. It says here in the 5th chapter of Matthew, you have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away. Ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you, Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Now remember this, that Christ Jesus was a Hebrew. He not only was a Hebrew, he was a Hebrew rabbi, preaching in Hebrew synagogues. And so surely you must know that he knew the Hebrew law. He knew the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He knew this, love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. He knew all of these things taught in the Old Testament, and he must have been well drilled in them, for he was a rabbi. Must have studied them thoroughly. Now, whence came to him this idea that you must not have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that you must not resist evil, that you must not have vengeance on those who smite you, that you must not refuse them that borrow from you or would borrow from you? From whence came to him the knowledge of love your enemies? Where did that come from? Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. He did not get it from knowledge. He did not get it from his book learning. He did not get it from his church teaching. He got it from the source that the infinite way is trying to introduce into the world today, your soul faculties, your soul consciousness. That higher faculty which the man in the street knows nothing about, because the man in the street today who thinks he's a Christian is just as much of a Hebrew as all of the others who return evil for evil, who are willing to pray for their brothers and not for their enemies. All of those who live by bread alone, all of those who live by the law of clause, all of those who live by force, by human weapons, they're not Christians. They're Hebrews. They're Hebrews of the Old Testament. They've merely been born into a church that calls itself a Christian church. But they haven't accepted Christianity, because Christianity is a revelation of soul faculties, of soul qualities of an individual that gives him a rebirth out of that old man who demands an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, who demands vengeance of his enemies, who demands that the enemy be punished. Christianity is a rebirth into the man who says, no, take my life, I won't take yours. If you must have our property and our money, come and get it. I'm not going to resist you or fight you. I know. And if you're in need, come and get from my abundance, even if in the end you get it all and I have none left, because I still have the source left. The word, every word, that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. That's where our food and drink comes from, not from earning it. Not from earning a living, not from sweating by the brow. That's the Old Testament again. Not by might, nor by power, but by thy Spirit do we live. If we're Christians. And if we don't live that way, we're not Christians if we do belong to a Christian church. There is within every one of us the kingdom of God, or the realm of the soul. There is within every one of us a capacity for living on earth in the same loving way that you and I are living in this room all week, without a quarrel, without suing, without fighting, without lusting, without hating, without envying. We can do that for a week. We can do it forever. But we couldn't do it as human beings. Oh, no, that wouldn't last. A room like this couldn't last a whole week in this atmosphere if we were human beings. Somebody, sure and later, would want to be sitting at the right hand of God or the left hand of God or the right hand of the teacher or the left. Somebody'd want to be the pet or the favorite, even if they had to pay $1 million to buy it. They'd find a way to do it if it could be done. Humans would. But not those who have learned that we do not live by bread alone, nor by using the weapons of the world, nor by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Now, no one can live that way as a human being, and that's why we are told by our friends outside that this is very impractical. Lovely, of course, but very impractical. Well, there are many of you who have seen this going on now for many, many years, have seen just these groups and have seen them just as friendly and just as loving and without quarrels and without lawsuits and without envies and without breaking up each other's homes. You've all seen that. So you know it can be done. But you can't do it as human beings. You can only do it when you have come to the realization that you're not living off of each other or from each other or by human modes or means, but every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And when you have access to that Spirit which is in man, which is the soul of God in man, which is Emmanuel, God with us, when you have access to that, it'd just be laughable to demand that your enemy be punished. You know right well that the very evil deeds they do is their own punishment. It has to be so. The deed is the seed that carries within itself its own fulfillment. You don't have to punish anybody. Just let them alone long enough, and their own actions will punish themselves. Don't hold anyone in condemnation, and as a matter of fact, even if you see your enemy on the way toward punishing himself, pray that he be forgiven too, even as you would be forgiven if you had done wrong and were on your way to punishment, like the thief on the cross. You'd be pretty happy if there were a Jesus about to say, don't worry, I don't condemn you, I'll take you with me into heaven tonight. Now, always remember that when you read this Sermon on the Mount, that you're reading something that is impossible to live, impossible to attain as a human being, unless you have access to the divine faculties within you, until you are living through your soul instead of through your body, until you are living by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God instead of the money that's in the bank. Until then, you will be this human being who is living according to the Hebrew standard that the Master cautioned us against. You see, he continues on into the 6th chapter, and he warns you, take heed that you do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Isn't that a plain statement? And yet, 99% of the world is doing their charity right before men's eyes, even getting it published in the newspapers or on the church board or somewhere else where some neighbor or friend or fellow citizen can say how noble you are, what a good Christian. But it says, ye have no reward of your Father which art in heaven. He tells you, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. You see, the Father is within you. That's your very own soul. That's your Father. And anything that you do, your soul knows. And if you do it in silence and in secrecy, it has a way of rewarding you openly. And he goes on and tells us that about prayer. When thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues. Well, of course, they don't have so many synagogues today. We have churches, but they're the same thing. They're places where men love to gather to pray. And he seems to think they do it that they may be seen of men. Well, maybe some aren't that ignoble, but this man had a good way of seeing through human nature. He says, but thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. When thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret. Thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. And for people who have lots of affirmations and mantrams, he says, but when ye pray, use not vain repetitions, as the heathen do. For they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Well, he has an answer for everything. But the real answer is this, the reason for all this. The very soul of you is God. Put it the other way, God is the very soul of you, but God is closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. There is nothing going on within you that the soul of you doesn't know. And while you may possibly fool the man standing beside you, you're certainly not fooling the man standing within you. Now, the secret of life is all in the word love. That really contains the entire secret of life. That's why even for the human sense of life, there either has to be love or some kind of an imitation of love or some sense of love between a man and a woman, even to bring forth the human sense of life. But actually, life is a thing of love. It's a thing of spiritual love. And you can only know when you are motivated by love when what you are doing seeks no return. When it isn't necessary for man whose breath is in his nostril to know the good things or loving things that you're doing, when it isn't necessary for you to shout from the housetop what you're doing, and more especially when you're doing it so silently and secretly that you couldn't possibly get a reward from anyone because they don't know that you're doing it for them. That is the meaning of love. Love is a loving deed that seeks no return, a loving thought, a loving word, a loving act that seeks no return, that is completely done in silence and in secrecy. Now that, of course, rules most of our lives out as far as loving is concerned, because most of what we do and we want the other fellow to know we're doing it, and we'd like a little thank yous besides. But that isn't love. All that this teaches in this book, in this Master's teaching, and more especially the Sermon on the Mount, is love. Doing things silently and secretly without a sign of desire for any reward, recognition, or gratitude, that is love. That is not doing it to be seen of men. That is not doing it for any earthly reward. And that's where you come back again to your soul faculty. You see, when you're doing it to be seen of men, you are seeking an earthly form of good in return. Whereas when you do it without your deed becoming known, you are seeking only a spiritual return, spiritual recognition, spiritual endowment. That's how you know when you're touching the soul faculties, when you can trust them with your every deed, with your every thought, and be perfectly satisfied that what is known in the interior of your being will come forth into visible fruitage. But you see, there is the entire principle. God is the soul of man, and that soul has faculties far beyond the intellect, far beyond the mental faculties or physical faculties. And those faculties, once we are in attunement with them, they really permeate the mental and the physical, and they make the mental and the physical eternal and immortal and infinite. Well, let us stop for a few minutes. I would suggest that you study the entire Sermon on the Mount and see if you can get from it anything like what I have gotten, which is this, that the Christian life, which is set forth in that sermon, is a complete life that does not respond or correspond to the human way of life. In other words, it sets forth a way of life that is a complete contradiction to all that we know about human living. For instance, for if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So actually then, to live humanly would be to forgive here and not forgive there, to hold in condemnation and criticism and judgment. That would be the human way, and you might even say, well, they deserve it, look what they did. But he brings to light a spiritual way of life that takes no cognizance of what they did. He just says, forgive. And in that same degree, are you forgiven? Well, of course, he could just as well have told you why. When you forgive, and that includes your own sins as well as others. And what you bind yourself to in unforgiveness, what you bind others to in unforgiveness, you're binding yourself to. What you forgive in others, you're forgiving in yourself. There's only one forgiver, and that's you. So if you can't forgive the other, you can't forgive yourself. It's you that's doing the forgiving. It's your own soul that's doing it, not some far-off God. Moreover, when ye fast, be not as the hypocrites, of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Again, the human thing of wanting to be good and wanting everybody to know it. But thou, when thou fastest, anoint thine head and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast. Again, you're just reversing the whole of the human picture. You're being good but not advertising it. You're being good but not seeking credit for it. Now again, the human way of life is to lay up treasures. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And of course the practical man says, now don't pay attention to that, because in your old age you'll wish you had some of that back again. And of course it will, if you've just dissipated your capital, if you've dissipated your money, if you've squandered it. There's no doubt about it. You may come upon a day when you wish you had it. But if you are living the Christian life, wherein he says that you shall take no thought for your life, now that's not sensible humanly, but as you find yourself being fed from those inner waters, life eternal, or that bread of life, I am the bread, I am the wine, I am the water, I am the resurrection. When you find that your life is being supported and maintained from the inner soul faculties, then you'll find that it isn't too sad if you happen to come to your later years without money. And I mean that even before there was Social Security. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. He cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot live after a human standard of life and at the same time reap the fruitage of a spiritual. You cannot be looking to an eye for an eye. You cannot be looking to laying up where moth and rust corrupt. You cannot be living the human code and at the same time praying to God for spiritual light and spiritual bread, spiritual wine, spiritual water. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore, take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For all these things do the Gentiles seek. Now the Gentiles were the human livers of those days. They were the pagans. They were the ones who lived after the flesh. And they seek those things, and they had those things, but he tells us that if you are living the Christian life, which is a dependence on the infinite invisible, if it is a life lived with the understanding that you have a soul within yourself, and that soul is your bread and your wine and your water, that soul is the strength of your body that renews the body and makes it youthful, harmonious, not for purposes of dissipation, for purposes of living. Then you see you are living by a spiritual standard, and you are living what was termed the Christian life, which was living by grace, or Paul called it living by Christ. I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. I can do all things not through muscles, not through bank accounts, not by revenge, not by savings, through Christ which strengtheneth me. Christ is the invisible Son of God, or your soul. God is the soul of man. Christ is the soul, individual soul of man. And you can live by Christ, but if you do, you have to give up living by mammon. That is, you have to give up the human weapons, the human reasoning, the human revenge and unforgiveness, or trying to save your life by taking somebody else's life. And then, of course, he comes right down to karma. Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. In other words, you cannot live by a spiritual standard of life while living the human way, nor can you live the human way, nor would you want to, when you're living the spiritual life. So I leave you with this message. There is within you that which we call your soul. That soul is the substance of your life. You can draw upon it as you would draw on your checking account for checks. Only there you're limited to what you have in the bank, and here you're only limited to what God has. You can draw on your soul for physical strength or mental wisdom, for skill in your art or your profession or in driving an automobile or running a kitchen or running your household. You can have more skill in running your household by living the spiritual life shown forth by the Master. And then you have spiritual faculties. Then you have spiritual capacities. You're without limit. Absolutely no limit to what you can accomplish, and you don't really accomplish it. It goes out invisibly into this world and draws to you everything necessary for your experience, everybody necessary for your experience. And you find yourselves drawn to the place where you should be at the right time, receiving that which you should have. But heaven help us if we go back again and try to live by our wits, to live by our human might, to live by our physical strength, because then we're worse off than we were before. Well, something happened anyhow. Thank you.